Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Property Pros and Cons, episode 11. I actually wrote that out this time, so anybody who's watched my previous episodes and is like, he doesn't really usually know what episode number it is, that's because I wrote it down. So we are at episode 11. It's great. And today I'm going to talk about an interesting article that's going to make a whole bunch of people happy, which is Axios Denver reported that the Denver real estate market is shifting to buyers' favor. Why? Because the number of closed sales decreased from the prior month, and the number of average days of market is now 13, which is still less than 2 weeks. But nonetheless, that's a 30% increase from the prior month, which essentially means maybe buyers are getting a chance, at least in Denver, to buy the house that they want to buy. And I guess on the seller side, that means maybe you should start thinking about selling your house if you are on the fence about it. But whatever the case might be, a shifting market is actually a good thing because whenever I talk to clients and they're sort of thinking about whether or not they're going to sell their home, one of the questions that they ask is, wait a minute, okay, I sell my house to this buyer, it sells in like a day, but then where am I going to move to? Right? So if you have a more sort of even market, that means that people can sell their house, know that they're going to be able to find a place to live, and buyers can buy houses as well. So a super overheated market, it's great for the sellers. It's great because you get a lot of money for your house, but it's not so great because all of that money goes to buying another house. Anyway, so I read this article, and one of the questions that I asked myself as I was looking at this article, or really whenever I read any news article, is, I wonder how these articles get written. Like, they're really cool, they're really nice to read, they're like well written, they all talk about something valuable. And, I realized that on the byline, there's always this reporter who's talking about, or there's a byline and there's a reporter. And I thought, what would be really cool? It would be really cool to interview a reporter, somebody who actually, at least at some point in time, wrote these articles and researched them so we can find out what happens behind the curtain. Because, I always wonder, okay, I trust what's written in articles. I trust Axios. I trust the Union Tribune. But I really wondered, okay, how does an article become an article? And I thought, okay, so who do I know who is a reporter? And I found our wonderful, wonderful guest who's also extraordinarily funny and very good at what she does. And she will be here with us today to talk a little bit about reporting and what it means to be a reporter. She actually reported on the real estate market, specifically the crash in 2008. So she reported on that. And now she kind of, does a whole bunch of communication stuff. And, I don't know what the best way of putting it is. So she'll talk about what she does. We're going to talk about the real estate market and, what happens behind the curtain when it comes to reporting, and also a little bit about real estate policy during our interview, which will happen right after this cute little intro. Hello. So Jen Lebron is our interesting insider today. Jen Lebron is a native San Diegan who has dedicated her career to make her hometown a better place for the next generation. After getting her start as a residential real estate reporter for the San Diego Daily Transcript, which, if you don't know, is a legal newspaper, in 2008, she later worked as a reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune and the Arizona Republic. At the Republic, she was part of a Pulitzer Prize finalist team of reporters who covered one of the deadliest wildfires in United States history. Jen then made the pivot to public service, where she worked as a top communications official for the Port of San Diego and for San Diego mayors Kevin Faulconer and Todd Gloria. That means that she can work across the aisle. Earlier this year, she left the city of San Diego to start her own public affairs firm, Lebron Strategic Consulting LLC. She is a board candidate for San Diego Pride. When not working or volunteering, Jen is at Padres games, playing kickball, or camping in the San Diego back country. So, we are going to talk to Jen today. Jen, thank you so much for being our guest today, and welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Frantz. It's really exciting to be here and be a part of the show.
Awesome. So, all right, I'll just like go by your bio, look at your bio, and say, the thing that I read that was most interesting is the deadliest wildfire in United States history. So, what was that about?
Well, that was an incredibly unfortunate series of events. So, folks may be familiar with the Yarnell Hill fire that they made a movie about. With the Granite Mountain hotshots. And so what happened was during this incredibly huge wildfire, a group of 20 hotshots went in to protect the town of Yarnell. And unfortunately, only one of them came out alive. And through the reporting that the Arizona Republic did, it was discovered over time that there had been federal brush fire funds that had been horribly mismanaged. And so the area in which those hotshots were should have been cleared out. And instead it turned into a deadly trap. And it was one of the worst weeks, frankly, that I spent as a reporter. And at the same time, it was incredible to see the levels of support from all of the surrounding towns, to see the way that folks tried to take care of the families of those brave 19 men who gave it all. It was, then Vice President Joe Biden came out, to provide his condolences, and just seeing the families and watching everybody come up together in the face of this horrible tragedy. There was the smallest little bit of beauty in that you saw the goodness in people come out. And I had the unique privilege to be able to talk to those folks and to talk to the first responders on the ground who were trying to do everything that they could to stop that fire, stop more lives from being lost, stop more homes from being burned down, and to really preserve the beauty in that part of Arizona the best way that they could. And, it's one of those moments where, as a reporter, you have to do two really hard things, and that is report the truth about tragedy and try to find that light in those dark times. And I'm incredibly grateful for the career that I had as a reporter. So sorry, that it's kind of one that I have a hard time talking about sometimes, just because it was a very intense event, to say the least.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. And it sounds like that I really love what you said about sort of finding the beauty in tragedy. I kind of think about those, pine cones that don't open until there's a fire, and so being able to sort of allow something to grow in something that terrible that happened, and you really articulated that very well. So I understand why you had the career that you have.
Well, I have to credit it, frankly, to one of the widows of the hotshots. She didn't want to be quoted in anything. She didn't want me to talk about her or anything like that. But she was kind enough to open her door when I knocked. And, she was basically the one who was like, look, the story about my husband isn't one just about this horrible incident. Like, he was a good man who did amazing things. He wanted to be a part of this group because he believed that his work could save lives. And that was so powerful to me that it's like, we can get so caught up in everything that's negative out there. And it doesn't mean that we don't respect when those tragic things happen, or that we shy away from it or pretend it doesn't exist. But I think it's really important, especially after hearing her talk to me about that we focus on those bright moments when we can. Because if we just focus on the darkness, we risk being enveloped by it. And so, you can say what you want about me, but it's really truly a testament to someone who inspired me when they were going through what is undoubtedly one of the darkest, if not the darkest period of their life, and still having a certain sense of centeredness and kindness. That was unreal, almost.
Yeah, that is really impressive, and I really appreciate your being able to articulate that for us and talk about it. And it sounds like either I'm not sure where it fell in the chronology of you sort of reporting on the housing crisis in 2008. I think it came after that, but I wonder how did reporting on the housing crisis, which was also a tragedy, um, inform and help you think about being a reporter and sort of talking about difficult moments for people?
Oh, absolutely. I was my very first job was as a residential real estate reporter here in San Diego in 2008. If we all remember, the actual bottom of the market was April 2009. I started that June in 2008. So I got to watch the tail end of bottoming out, and then also got to talk a little bit about that slow, slow, slow rebound that we had until, of course, the market became what we know it as today.
Right.
And so, really, the thing about reporting, it doesn't matter what you're covering, frankly. It has to be about real people. If you are not focusing on real, live human beings with real lives, with real emotions, with real people that they care about, you're not doing it right, in my opinion. It's not just about these big issues or the market numbers or what have you. It's like, how is that affecting normal people, your neighbors, your family, your friends? And as a reporter, I wanted to always bring those human elements into my stories, because otherwise, who am I writing for, really? And so, I was a rookie. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. I was so grateful to my editor at the time, a fellow named Joe Guerin, who later went on to be one of the news editors over at KPBS and recently retired, for giving me the opportunity to be able to really be able to talk to folks. And one of the things that I did early on was reach out to actual realtors and actual brokers and say, hey, can you put me in touch with one of your clients about the struggles that you've had? Because one of the interesting things about coming out of that market was we ended up with a little bit of low inventory at one point, or just there wasn't a whole lot of inventory, but nobody was biting either, and trying to learn about why people were afraid at that point in time. So, heck, even personally, as I'm reporting these stories and I'm talking to experts, folks like local economists and real estate experts such as Alan Ginn or Alan Nevin, my two favorite Allens in the real estate world, they were very helpful in just sort of taking a long-term view of what the market could become based on historical information, but also were very helpful with putting me in touch with their sort of real life sources too, as they're doing their research. Who do they talk to? Do I know anybody personally who's trying to buy a house or sell a house? Do I know anybody who's underwater? And it's about getting to that, if you will. It's about talking to the real live human beings and figuring out what their struggles mean and celebrating their victories too.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So, um, you know, obviously this is kind of an unavoidable question since you talked about since you reported in 2008, and I don't know to what extent you're really like doing research and talking to people right now about the housing market, but what parallels do you see between now and 2008, and what differences do you see between now and 2008, just from like a story perspective?
Sure, sure. Now, I want to be very upfront and honest with your audience. I am no longer a real estate reporter at all. I do public affairs consulting. I've worked with a lot of elected officials, nonprofit organizations, and the like. And so I'm a little bit removed from this world, right? I also happen to be a San Diegan who is currently a renter. a former homeowner and a friend of many who are debating whether or not now is the right time to either buy or sell their home. And so, one thing that I think I see some parallels in is there is a level of uncertainty with folks who are viewing this market in a way that I don't think I have seen really since that time. Previously, it was very much like, at least amongst the folks that I know who are looking into real estate, um, there was some concern about trying to buy, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago anyway. Let's buy because right now the pricing seems right. It seems like it is more or less comparable with what I would be paying for rent, and this is going to be an investment in my town, in my community, and in my family. Now almost no one I know is looking to get into the market because they are worried about prices just being frankly too high. The smaller number of people I have talked to who are interested in buying like right now, it's simply because they want to set down their roots in San Diego forever, and they're really worried about getting priced out for all eternity. I don't know if I share that same kind of concern because when you look at vacancy rates and what have you, you look at the way that everything has been rising exponentially, you look at what the Fed's doing with interest rates. I don't know if I buy that it's just going up forever. And even if it does keep going up for a little while, I'm willing to wait it out a little bit until it comes down. That way I have my own protections, if you will, to an extent going forward. Just because I saw how afraid everybody was in 2008 in particular of buying, because they were like, well, what if I end up underwater? And it's like, well, hey, everybody. And I, again, have to credit the experts. I'm no real estate genius, nor do I pretend to be. But one of the things that they said was like, look at San Diego and look at real estate in general. If you hang on long enough, you're always going to come out on top, especially in a place like this. And so, if as far as I'm concerned, this is my hometown. I've lived elsewhere, sure, but like I want to be here. And so if I wait until a point where the market dips a little bit, regardless of if that's 5 years from now or 5 months from now, I have no problem hanging on for the long run and weathering the storm of letting prices go even lower than my buying point, because I'm counting on history repeating itself and waiting in that long-term fashion, whether that be 10 years, 20 years, etc., to make it work. I mean, I think about my parents. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was a coffee shop owner and insurance salesman. And they bought a beautiful, beautiful, gigantic 4-bedroom home in Tirisana in 1986 for $125,000. Earlier this year, on their block, with a smaller house than what they have, that thing sold for over $1 million. They don't regret that purchase one bit. And I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that you're ever going to see that kind of return in the future, but I'm willing to bet on my city. And I wouldn't be surprised if others are too.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective, and I also kind of really like what you were talking about in terms of being willing to hold on and sort of wanting to set down roots. So I think that when people purchase a home, there's obviously the financial component to it, and it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm buying something, but then there is sort of this emotional component to, I own my home. This is mine, right? Like, this is my house. This is where I live. This will always be mine. And I think that's also, and I think you can probably comment on this actually. I think that is what was so devastating about 2008, because there are other economic downturns. There are times when companies, lose value. That happened in the early 2000s with the dot-com boom or bubble or whatever. But I really don't think that people lost something that they really felt was like theirs. Like when you buy shares, it's like, I kind of own this company, but I don't have a whole lot of stake in it. But when it's your house, there is this emotional component to it that's really, really tragic. So I wonder if that's something that you saw in 2008. And if that maybe is still something that's just not completely gone away.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, one of the most gut-wrenching stories I did was somebody tipped me off about these squatters, as they referred to them. And really, I mean, what it was what we saw a lot of in the early 2000s, where basically with these adjustable rate mortgages, this couple had bought their home, rate went up, they couldn't make the payments anymore, and then they fell way behind. And so the house was foreclosed on. And what they tried to do at one point, if I remember correctly, this was a really long time ago, so please forgive me, but they had at one point tried to make at least partial payments to try to like refi the thing or something like that, and that just didn't work. But they really wanted to keep their home. And so, you know, when I knock on their door and I'm like, hey, I was told that you're here, tell me why. You know, I want to be fair in my story, because you've got your collectors over here saying you're doing a bad thing, right? But like, tell me why. And what they had to tell me, it's really, it's one of those moments where, you know, as a reporter, you're kind of you try to be as objective as you can be. And in my case, I'm very much of two minds, right? Like, I believe strongly that if you make a commitment, you should follow through with that. And then I'm also looking across at these folks who clearly didn't fully understand the consequences of what they had signed previously. They thought that they were in their forever home. They thought that, you know, the renovations that they did, like, they were going to get to enjoy those for years to come. And now they're in this legal battle with a bank. Like $1 billion company with lawyers out the wazoo versus two people who felt like they got the wool pulled over their eyes. And, you know, thank God I'm not a judge who has to make the choice, right, between who's right and wrong in this situation, because it was one of those moments where you're like, well, I mean, you signed the paperwork. Also, predatory lending is very real, and I don't know what was said to you when you did this or what was promised to you. And you chose to trust these folks who you saw as experts and people you thought were on your side, and they clearly betrayed you in this moment, or at least you feel like they betrayed you. So, yeah, I mean, to get back to your question about like that emotional connection, like, yeah, that's very much there. It's very much there. I mean, I had a friend who bought a home earlier last year, and I was like, we even had a conversation. I'm like, buddy, like, maybe now's not the right time given everything else. And he's like, well, I'm expecting my second kid. We're going to be like, we need more space, and we're going to be there for as long as we can possibly be there. And so, you know, he and his wife bought the home that they've always wanted. And yes, maybe it was a price point that was higher than they had originally hoped for. At the same time, they're looking at this as when their kids are headed off to college, they're going to get to say goodbye to the home that they grew up in. And to them, that's worth every penny.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, since your bio talks about you being a board candidate for Pride, and, you know, obviously San Diego Pride is an organization that works with LGBTQ plus a whole bunch of other letters people. And I wonder, just from your perspective, if you feel that allowing gay marriage, allowing sort of either same-sex or other types of family units to form in a legally sanctioned, blessed way, do you find that that changes attitudes towards homeownerships within those communities?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. I think I get what you're saying, though.
And I can ask it again because it was not a good question. But
well, no. I think it's fine. I mean, what you're really talking about here is, does being able to enter into a legally binding agreement with another adult to share your finances, taxes, and medical issues, if you will, does that change homeownership? Of course it does. I don't care if you are gay, straight, or whatever else you want to call yourself these days. If you are willing to legally get married, and that makes a difference in your choices, like, it's going to change the way that you plan for things versus being, oh, geez, I can't remember what the term is, but it's something like tenants with a common interest, I believe is what it's called. If you are not in fact married, but purchase property together or something along those lines. But yeah, that's going to change it. because that means you've got a little bit more structure. You have that basic foundation, if you will, of having a partner, like a legal business partner, if you will, in terms of the investment that you're making. It's a little more certainty versus like if you lose your job tomorrow and you're the only name on that mortgage, that's pretty scary.
Right.
But if you got somebody else, that means you have a backup plan. And I don't care what you call that person, but having that makes a difference. And of course, like there's all of the things that we associate with marriage that aren't just that legally binding document or the credit check, right? And
Right.
the creation of that family unit. And that is so much, I feel like those are such different things than, do you think that gay marriage opens the door to home purchasing in some ways?
Yeah, and I think I was really talking more about, do you think that gay marriage not opens the door sort of like practically, but sort of opens the door to gay people or LGBTQ people who might not form sort of what people think of as like, a husband, wife, child relationship, makes them think, oh, there's a reason for me to buy a home. There's a
Oh,
reason for us to buy a home.
sure, absolutely. Absolutely. Because one of the things in whatever relationship you may be, whether it is, an actual marriage with children, or if it's a polyamorous situation, or heck, even if it's just a bunch of folks who want to live in a commune or what have you, having that group of people who are sort of committed to one another means that you are also committed to finding a place that makes sense for you in the long run and creates a certain element of stability. And I think that having marriage equality be codified for as long as it was, although we all know that is at risk at this point. So, if you happen to live anywhere red, write your representative and let them know how displeased you are, because Team Blue is going to fight for it. That's, I promise, as political as I'm going to get today. But yeah, I do think that it does create this element of wanting to have roots for your family, however you define that. And I don't think we're talking about anything that radically different than what, cisgendered heteronormative couples would be dealing with, to use, that kind of language, if you will. But like, it's not,
Right.
and that's the thing about a lot of the conversations around marriage equality is, how different is it really? It's just people who love each other, who just want to be able to have the same rights as everybody else, to be able to do all the things that any other married couple would want to be able to do. And so, when you ask the question, does it open doors? Sure, it does. If for no other reason, is that there are a lot of states that won't discriminate against you because of it. And I guess I'm speaking from a California perspective here, because I can't really speak to the states that still have allowed for discrimination, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that I'm saying here, I think, makes more sense for a California audience than it might for if you've got listeners in like, Nashville or something like that. I don't know if that's the same case there, because I don't know if you can even do that and hope to have somebody sell you the house in the first place.
Right. Well, I mean, these are really good. These are actually really good questions. And probably that sparks the idea to maybe bring in a FIHA, FHA attorney who can talk about housing discrimination and what is allowed and is not allowed. California is definitely less permissive in terms of discrimination than certain other states.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Thank goodness for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's certainly, I think that it at least changes the mindset, or the cultural mindset, where we just kind of, at least in theory, are trying to see people as people. Or, if you're in a business transaction, if you're selling a house, then you're just seeing it as a business transaction, which I think on a lot of levels, people don't want to think about it that way. But like at the end of the day, it's like, who has the dollars, who has the sense, and then you give it to the person who has the most dollars, the most sense, and does it on the terms that are best for you without thinking about who they are, because it's not your house anymore, and it's a transaction. Just it's as personal as the pieces of paper that you're signing.
That would be in a perfect world, right? But I have a sister
I
in South
know.
Carolina. I have a sister in South Carolina, and I know that's not always the case. I mean, part of the reason she and her husband got their house was because the couple who lived there previously looked at them and were like, you love dogs, you plan on starting a family soon, you deserve our house. And it was very personal.
Exactly.
Like, it was very personal, and we know that that is not going to be the same feedback, if you will, that same-sex couples would get from everyone in a place like South Carolina. It's not to say that there aren't pockets of wonderful people there. It doesn't mean that there aren't people fighting for the right thing, or that there aren't neighborhoods that are amazing.
Right.
But it has a reputation for a reason, right? Like, the laws that they have on the books are not exactly friendly to LGBTQ plus folks. And frankly, I'm a little bit worried about what's to come nationally for some of the folks who are living in areas that aren't like California, and what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. Um, and the flip side of it is, I think it's also a question of like, which I will just put out into the world without expecting a response from you at all. But I mean, I really think that one of the big questions is, have we been relying on the court for too long to do what we want, to make our country what we want it to be? Have we been relying on the Supreme Court to sort of make these tough decisions when we really, as voters, should have been making these tough decisions ourselves? And like, okay, maybe this person, like, I don't totally agree with them on this point, but in general, I think that overall they're going to make this world the type of world that I want to see. And
I'm
when you
so
look at,
sorry to
oh,
cut
go
you off.
ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm really glad you're not making me answer that question, because that's a rabbit hole that we could dive down for like the next like 3 hours on. So
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think that is kind of my question for everybody to ponder and think about is, the court has done really great things, but is it time for us to kind of take charge and say, okay, we're going to elect representatives who represent the things that we want our country to look like? And when you look at polling, a lot of people want a lot of things that we are not electing politicians to do. And I think that makes a very nice segue to your other career.
not wrong. Yeah. I mean, frankly, that's why I became a public servant. Honestly, like, it's why I wanted to, even though I know that like everybody just rolls their eyes when it comes to politicians, and I was a press secretary for one mayor, the director of communications for another, and I understand every single person who hears that and is like, wait a minute, like there's something wrong with her, like what's she trying to spin right now? But honestly, like, if we look at the system and we have an issue with it, I mean, maybe this is just me, but I want to do what I can to fix it. I love that we live in a democracy. That means every single person has power to make change. And I am a proud daughter of immigrants. Both my parents were born and raised in the Philippines, and they came here. And I was fortunate enough to have one grandfather who was an American soldier in World War II. It's kind of how we came here. But, I come from a line of people who have deep, deep pride in this country and believe in the ideals that it was founded upon. They recognize it's never been perfect. It probably will never be perfect, but that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting for. And so, when I hear you talking about like, do we need to take it into our own hands? I'm just like, amen to that, brother. Let's go. Because this is a country that, as cheesy as it sounds, it's supposed to be for the people and by the people. But if the people are apathetic, what happens then? And so I've tried to make a career to an extent because, you know, you gotta, at some point, you gotta pay some bills, right? But I want to try to help where I can. I want to try to help people make it a little bit better, help in the areas where if they do have control over something, to be able to vote for things that are going to make their community better, or at different points, maybe not vote for something because it might make things a little worse. And in the, I've been very honored to be able to have the opportunity to serve two mayors in this city. And I'm extraordinarily proud of the work that I was able to do with both of them and the work that both of those administrations have done to try to make San Diego a little bit better for the next generation. Now, I know that there are probably people who are watching this or listening to this who hate either Kevin Faulconer or Todd Gloria, or maybe they hate them both. That's fair. Again, don't blame you. Politicians have never given you a good reason to like trust them fully. But what I will say is that behind all of them are a whole lot of people who actually sincerely care, who are trying really, really hard to do the right thing, who are putting policies in front of them that they believe will actually make this world a little better. You can disagree all day about whether or not those policies are the right one, but I will debate anybody if you try to tell me it's not done with a lot of heart behind it the vast majority of the time. There are bad guys. I'm not going to pretend there aren't. But it takes so many people to change a law or a policy or even rewrite an administrative regulation for the city employees of San Diego to follow only, that some of the things that I hear about politicians and the people who work around them just don't ring true by my experience. At least not on the local level. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know how things go in DC. I've never worked in DC. I don't know. Or Sacramento for that matter. I've worked with some of them, but I'm not there all the time. But at this local level, everyone who's listening to this should know that you, as a resident of the city of San Diego, have an opportunity to make a serious difference if you just reach out to these folks. They'll listen.
I think that's a really valuable. I think that is a really valuable point, and I like that. You know, we talk about politicians having constituents, and you know that really kind of is true. They are a person, often with staff and other things, who are sort of made up of the people that they represent. And when they take office, regardless of whether there's a D or an R by their name or whatever other parties may exist, they really are obligated to represent the constituents that they represent. But they don't know what their constituents want unless their constituents tell them.
Very true. And, you know, I know that sometimes people get frustrated when they're emailing their representatives and they feel like they're not getting the answer that they want. Government moves slow. I don't think that's like rocket science right there. You know, like you're laughing just because you're like, well, duh, of course. But like I'm going to say it again. Government moves slow. The reason I'm saying that again is because just because you emailed somebody once doesn't mean they're going to listen on that first time. Just because you email them twice doesn't mean they're going to listen. But once you start seeing certain patterns, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't just one person with this issue or problem. This is a lot of people. Like now the priorities change because let's face it, in government, you have a million different things pulling at you. At the city of San Diego alone has more than 40 departments, which means that you have 40 different distinct sections that all require your attention in varying degrees of criticality. You have to prioritize. You can't say every single one of those 40 things is the top of my list. It's impossible.
Right.
I mean, you know, like that's spending, if you wanted to break it down, that would mean a mayor is spending 1 hour a week on every single one of those issues. How can you get anything done?
Right.
And so it's really that prioritization. And that's where residents can make such a big difference, is that you help set the priorities for your representative by telling them what you care about. And it's frustrating. I know it's frustrating. I've been on the receiving end of those emails where initially it was like, okay, I hear you, but like I'm sorry, it's not going in the budget this year. Your pet project that you want, like we have to do X, Y, and Z thing before we get to that. But I've also seen what happens when that initial email turns into like 20 emails or 200 emails, and how quickly things can change in terms of priority, because you're like, wait a minute, okay, I didn't think this was that big of a deal, but clearly all of my constituents are saying, or like this big group of constituents is saying, this is super important. I should be paying closer attention to this. Everybody's human. We only have so much capacity to intake information around us. And sometimes the issues that matter the most to a constituent aren't the ones that you're seeing on the front page of the Union Tribune or hearing on the 6 o'clock news. It's something that is not being necessarily talked about massively on social media, or even if it is, it's being talked about in a way that those neighbors or those residents don't think is the right way. And creative ideas are welcome more often than folks might think. So I'm not going to make you a promise that all of these folks are going to take exactly what you say verbatim and enact it. That's not how this works. But it also doesn't hurt to have those good ideas, because they will take notes. And I have certainly seen where residents can significantly influence policy because of good ideas and a willingness to approach it in a professional manner, where it's not just rant and rave and screaming, calling names, but actually presenting something that is factual, demonstrates the benefit to the community, and ultimately is something where the resident shows a deep passion for it.
Thank you for that. And I was just going to pop that on the screen before we go on, because I think that's really helpful. And I also can't spell beneficial.
Okay. Well, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, but so yes, as you said, something that's factual, passionate, and beneficial to the community. I think that's really helpful. If you're going to talk to your representatives, because if it's true, if it's beneficial, and you've got some heart behind it, then at the very least, politicians understand that the facts need to support it. It needs to benefit, but if there's some passion behind it, politicians understand that their constituents actually care.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when to bring it back to housing a little bit here, this is one of those things where, while I was working for former Mayor Kevin Faulkner, a Republican, I might add, he said during his 2019 State of the City speech that he was a YIMBY mayor, which on a lot of different levels, I mean, this is 2019, it's not 2022, right?
Right.
To basically say that you are pro-housing when a lot of your constituents are not so much, that's a little bit different, right? But at the same time, San Diego's demographics were clearly changing. There were more folks coming here, more people being priced out of homes and not being able to stay in the city that they grew up in and loved. And so for Mayor Faulkner to basically say that came from this huge wave of people over the, he came into office in 2014, and then, he stakes his ground as a YIMBY in 2019. That meant there was some pretty significant change that happened. And that was because the people of San Diego said loudly and clearly, we need to build more housing. And that is something that I don't think you can find a politician in this town, at least I shouldn't say in this town, in the city of San Diego. I won't speak for the rest of the region, but there's not a politician in the city of San Diego that is not pro-housing now. That was definitely not the case several years ago.
That is really helpful to hear, actually. And I think that sort of shows the importance of talking to your constituents, or as a politician, talking to your constituents, and as a constituent, talking to your politicians, and understanding that, maybe somebody has grown up here, they'd like to be able to own a home, and they can't. Because people are coming from outside of San Diego and staking roots here because they can afford it and you can't. I think it's really helpful to tell politicians that so that they understand the impact of it. And also, from a practical perspective, you lose a lot of not exactly institutional knowledge because
Sure.
but you lose a lot of sort of that sense of community and the and also institutional knowledge. Like if people start leaving the city of San Diego because they can't live there anymore, you lose that institutional knowledge because they're going elsewhere. So that's really helpful to
Yeah.
know.
Let's face it, if you have a family in San Diego today and you have young children, wouldn't you prefer them to stick around so you're close to them as they get older? Wouldn't it be great if they live just a short walk or drive away from where you're at? I know for my parents, it was pretty devastating to have my sister decide to move literally across the country because she could actually afford a home there and have a family there. But she and her husband felt that that was the choice that they had. They couldn't do they couldn't live the lives that they wanted to here in San Diego. And I know that my family's story is not a unique one here by any stretch of the imagination. And both mayors, all of the folks on the city council, past or more recently especially, they see that too, where they recognize the importance of having families have the choice to stay together if they want to versus being priced out of the place that they love. And so that element, I think, is really what it's all about, is really, again, to circle back all the way to the beginning, is making it about real live people and the struggles that they see. And so, it's the government asks the question, well, okay, so what can we do? What can we do to help? And oftentimes what government can do is, it has to play in part with just the way that the business community and markets are going along with public sentiment in a lot of ways. But what it can do is it can clear some hurdles. And so, our current mayor and our previous mayor have both done quite a bit to remove some of the hurdles. That way we can build more housing in San Diego. And really it's a fight to keep the next generation of San Diegan adults here, because they're our current generation of San Diego kids.
Right. I think that's really helpful. And we have a couple of really awesome questions that were generated from viewers. So
Oh boy.
with that really great, with that really great segue, I will move on to our last segment, Ask the Pro. It was originally called Ask the Pro with Frantz Farreau. Now it's just Ask the Pro who was on the show.
All right. I like that it still rhymes.
I will change that. So the first question that we got is kind of interesting, and I think I know what you're going to say to this, but do you think there is more that unites the political parties than divides them?
That is a really interesting question, the way that that is phrased. And the reason I say that is that I believe there's a lot that unites people, just regardless of what letter they choose to put next to their name. Because I think all people kind of want the same things ultimately. And that's that they want to be able to live the happiest version of their lives possible. And that's really vague. And I know that that means many different things to a lot of people. But when we start breaking down what we care about, we want to see others okay, if that makes sense. We don't want crime, obviously, because that hurts people, right? When we see a homeless person on the street, regardless of how you might feel that should best be addressed, you don't want them there because obviously they're not living what in most of us house folks' minds would be the most optimal version of their life. you want folks to feel like they can achieve whatever it is they want to achieve. And I say that so vaguely because, what I want to achieve and what you want to achieve and what the guy who is working on the fishing boat down at the harbor want to achieve might be really different things. But at the same time, we want to live that ideal life. And so when you ask, do the political parties have more that unites us than divide us? I mean, no, because they're intentionally trying to be really different than one another. But do I think the human beings that actually make up those parties have more in common than the parties themselves would have us believe? Absolutely. I truly believe that if we can put aside some of the team red, team blue nonsense and come back to what's going to be good for the human being in front of me and like have a real honest conversation about that comes from the heart, we're going to do a lot better in this country than we ever have. And one of the things that I have loved about not only getting to work in the political scene of San Diego for many years, but when I was a reporter at the Union Tribune getting to cover it, was that you got to see that play out a lot. Because technically, in the city of San Diego, every single seat is nonpartisan. I mean, we obviously know Todd Gloria's a Democrat and Faulkner's a Republican. You can't escape that. But there is no designation next to their name on the actual ballot. And when you look at how San Diego politicians have traditionally worked, they're working in purple territory. It's not red or blue, it's a pothole. It's like, how do we fix those better, right? Like, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, you hate the dang potholes. It's talking about things like creating opportunity for youth to be able to get a better education. Like, if we're looking at that from a national level, like, you can fight all you want, but here in San Diego, that means making sure that parks are accessible to every person, period, regardless of what zip code you call home. It's making sure that your library programs are free, accessible, and strong. And everybody can get behind that. And so if we're focusing on people, I think it takes away a lot of that, like, team red, team blue. So to whoever asked that question, I'm sorry I didn't answer you directly, but I also feel like I can't answer it directly because that's just not how I feel, if that makes sense. So,
I think that's a good. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. This is also a very interesting question, which is, how do you think local politics and national politics intersect?
We have to beg them for money a lot. I'm half joking with that, and I'm also not. But it's very much a real thing, though, where you do have to play your local politics differently based on who's sitting in the chair in the Oval Office. And really, to a point as well, what the House and Senate makeup looks like as well, because they are going to be funneling down funding to our region. And in San Diego in particular, we have one of the highest, if not the highest, concentrations of military and veteran personnel in the entire world here, with our installations of the Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and we even have some Army and a little bit of Air Force for that matter too. From my knowledge, I don't think we have Space Force yet in town. But we are definitely, we have a very high military population. And so that means the federal government is a little more involved with us than they are in some other cities. And so the way that it really intersects is dependent upon what the political makeup looks like in either direction. And so, I guess I'll share a quick anecdote here. When Mayor Faulkner first got into office, it was under an Obama presidency. Then it shifted over to Trump. And so while it didn't change what we do here in San Diego all that much, it certainly changed a little bit of what, and keep in mind, I'm a communications professional, right? So my job is to try to frame everything in the best possible light for the best possible outcome. That's my job. And so you talk about things just a little bit differently depending on your audience. And anybody who's in sales understands that concept, right? You're going to look at who has the ability to give you what you're looking for to benefit the folks you're fighting for. And you're just going to talk about it a little bit differently. And, right now we're very fortunate to have alignment political alignment at the local, state, and national level, which means that San Diego's got a little bit of a bigger voice than it would have otherwise. And so when you have, like in the case of, Mayor Faulkner and the Trump presidency, which, I mean, that, don't get me started on that. That was one of the most frustrating, it was a frustrating part of my career. Let's just say that. It makes it difficult because you've got this guy who is just abhorrent in the top seat in the country. And at the same time, he's looking at your guy and you're like, wait, that's the only Republican mayor out of the top 10 biggest cities in the United States? Woohoo! Let's get that guy on everything. And you're like, oh God, no, you stand for nothing that he stands for. Like, these are almost different parties entirely. And at the same time, you're like, I also need you to not cut off funding to my city or take retaliatory actions against it the way that you have in other democratic cities. And so, like, you've got to weigh stuff like that sometimes, which is super unfortunate, but I don't think I'm telling anybody anything that's unknown, in the sense that you've got to do what's right. And you can't always control who's at the national level. And you've got to fight for the people who elected you to represent them to the best of your ability. And, while I was not a huge fan of our former president, nor am I, while he was there, you had to acknowledge that he did have control over a variety of things that affected San Diegans very directly. And with that in mind, it doesn't help anybody to just throw your lollipop in the sand and say, I'm not working with you anymore, because what that ends up doing can really end up hurting people. And it's a fine balance, and it's not an easy one. And I frankly do not envy our former mayor one bit, and the tightrope that he had to walk during that. Just as somebody who, was one of the co-chairs for marriage equality, for example, like, he's a cis male and was like out there with the banners and the signs and fighting for it, supporting the Equality Act too. And that's really that's a very different posture than his Republican colleagues elsewhere. So, when you're asking how these things intersect, they intersect very much so. But I would say that the politics aren't as big of a part of it as the practicalities of what your federal government is supposed to be doing for you and what your local government is supposed to do in response to that, or in their asks to that federal government.
That's actually, well, I said it was an interesting question. And in fact, it was a very interesting question with a really interesting answer. And I didn't, that the political tightropes, it's almost like, for me, navigating family. It's like, okay, I know that like Uncle X is the person who's going to support me for this. I don't like Uncle X, but then, Aunt Y needs to do this with Uncle X so I can get that. And I mean, it happens within families. And I think in politics, it's just a much larger instance of the same sort of like dynamics of figuring out how to navigate people.
Oh man, it's hard. It's frustrating. I don't blame anybody who never wants to get into this business, because it is, and everybody is going to villainize you no matter what you choose, right? And so all you can do is try to do the best that you can, believe in the work that you're doing, and believe that you're actually trying to make it better. Because if you lose sight of that, if you try to make it about you or anything like that, it's a recipe for failure. You've got to keep fighting for the people who put you there. And if you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong.
Well, I think on that note, that's a really, really great way for us to close out. I really want to thank you for coming and talking and being a guest on my show and talking to all of our listeners and viewers. And I also think that, my goal for the show has always been to bring some interesting perspective to, real estate and real property and that industry. And I really think that you did that. So of course I could bring in, a real estate lawyer, a real estate broker, or a title person or whatever, but, you really bring an interesting perspective to this sort of conversation so that homeowners understand, what do we need to think about as homeowners, right? What do we need to think about? Who do we need to talk to? How can we navigate this bureaucracy so as homeowners, we can get what we want? So I want to thank you for being here, chatting with us. I'm going to pop your contact information up on the screen. Jen Lebron, LebronStrategic.com. I love that it rhymes or half rhymes or something like that.
Close enough.
And yeah, so I will see you all next week with another Real Estate Pro. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.